long meal. I've got with me, you can sit. For the final panel, we're going to be talking to a whole bunch of student entrepreneurs, almost all of whom are from Columbia. One is not, and one used to be but is no longer. But they're going to tell you what technology is being used for to make the world a better place, and they're really doing a great job of it. But to join me in having this discussion, we've got one of the leading philanthropists and social venturers in New York with us, Emma Bloomberg. And that's all the introduction I'm going to give, because we're going to talk about Emma and what she does as a little prelude to bringing the students up here. So anyway, Emma, thank you for being with us. So you've got a new enterprise called Murmuration, which means something like a covey of ravens or something like that. So tell us where you got the name from and what it is.
Yeah, sure. Is this?
Press the button on the left.
Ha! There we go. So it's not a covey of ravens. A murmuration, most commonly associated with starlings. You know, when you see sort of in the sky those big clouds of birds that somehow manage to move as one. The idea that it's basically sort of swarm intelligence. One bird affects the 7 birds closest to it, which affect the 7 birds closest to it, and somehow it understands as an entity that what's in the good of the collective is also what's in the good of the individual. The 501c4 political nonprofit that I started really came out of the idea that there were all of these local groups across the country who believed that our our public education system wasn't actually serving all kids, which is what it's supposed to do. And they are in their own sort of communities trying as hard as they can to bring to the attention of their elected officials, of their communities more broadly, the fact that this system isn't functioning and that kids are not being served, and therefore, really, if we think about it, the future of our country is at stake. So my thought here was there's all these great tools out there that are used by national parties, right, by big campaigns. Could we find a way to centralize data, tools, analytics, and strategic supports, and then share them with all of these smaller local groups who would never otherwise be able to access sort of that level of sophistication from a data and tool standpoint, and create a collective. So our mission is to fundamentally change the way these local political campaigns, advocates, and organizers think about identifying, engaging, and mobilizing people and communities. And we do that with a mix of proprietary data and analytics. We have a technology platform. We provide strategic guidance and supports, basically giving them all of the tools and skills that they need to put pressure on government and on the public at large to think about public education in a different way and to prioritize it as they're making their decisions. And we keep in mind that sort of collective idea, right? We foster collaboration across our groups, both in specific cities and communities, but also across the country. And we conduct sector-wide analytics and facilitate the ability to sort of share decision making and to have collective learning about what is working and what isn't, not in the public education system specifically, but in how to engage people around that public education system. So just very specifically on that piece.
So we've spent the last 24 hours basically hearing about how politics is terrible, government's incompetent, and the nation state is going to cease to exist. Of all the things you could choose to focus on to help nonprofits and social ventures make a difference, you've chosen politics and government. So how come?
Gosh, after spending the day here, I wonder. Really, look, while I believe that government can't do everything, and one of the things that I'm really excited about for this panel in particular is sort of this idea that where government fails, social entrepreneurship can step in and can solve problems. And I think that that's critical for our country and for the world. But when you're talking about things at scale, like the public education system, if you actually want that collective good, something for everyone, I don't see a path that doesn't in some way involve public dollars. And I don't see a path that doesn't in some way involve both demand, communities more broadly, but also government and elected officials who are making decisions on a day-to-day basis about how to spend that money, sort of prioritizing it as an issue. So that's why.
So Murmuration is, how long has it been going on? A year, 2 years?
4 years.
4 years.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before that, you had involvement in a number of different but similar sorts of activities.
Yes.
So tell us your path to
Yeah.
where you're at now.
My career sort of straddled, bounced back and forth, however you want to put it, politics and philanthropy. But immediately prior to Murmuration, I spent 7 years at the Robin Hood Foundation, which is a nonprofit here in New York that is focused on fighting poverty in the 5 boroughs. I had a number of different sort of strategic jobs there, really around capacity building for the organizations that we worked with, helping them think about scale, helping them to think about growing their impact. And that was what really got me into the field of education and sort of to realize some of these deficiencies that were existing there.
So one more question, or kind of mega question. You can spin it off however you want, and then we'll bring on the first of the students. You and I talked a little bit about this, about where you see things going. Your life's touched on politics and government, on philanthropy in a more traditional sense, and in the emerging world of social ventures, in some ways a blending of both of those things. What do you see as the major trends out there? What do you think that landscape's going to look like over the course of the next decade?
Well, I think of the word trend differently now after today. But I guess I'm seeing 2 things that I find interesting, and maybe they're not particularly novel to anyone here, but one, at a local level, sort of here in the United States and in cities specifically, I'm increasingly seeing this, again, sort of this idea of collaboration. One mayor has figured out how to solve a problem in their city, not necessarily through city agencies, but using government dollars and bringing in social entrepreneurs. And they are sharing that information, and you're starting to see sort of mayors collaborating in that way and cities collaborating in that way. And similarly, philanthropists thinking about the world in that way, sort of taking, spending time in communities, talking to mayors, to community leaders, to churches, to agency heads, all of that, to identify what the gaps are that government is failing at, and then finding the social entrepreneurs across the country who have solved those problems and helping them to go there to solve that. So I think that sort of network effect is really fascinating. But at more of a sort of global scale, I've had the pleasure over the last year or 2 of getting to know a bunch of people who do work in ocean conservation. And the thing that I'm finding interesting about how they're addressing the problems is, on some level, they've given up on government. But they're going after corporations instead. And they're sort of saying, look, we're not going to wait for countries to change their laws so that we can see the good that we want to see, so that we can get rid of, in this specific case, single-use plastics. Right? We're going to go after all the big cruise lines, and we're going to go after Amazon, and we're going to make it seem like it's in their best interest by working with the public to create the demand and working with those corporations. Our sort of social venture can have the same kind of impact that we would otherwise expect to see from government.
Really interesting, and in general, I think that's the direction public policy is headed. So now we're going to take a look at where social ventures and the world we're living in are headed with some of the people who are shaping that future. We've got a half dozen young entrepreneurs here, some students, some not at this point, and we're going to let them choose the order that they come up on. So do we have a volunteer for who wants to go first? Okay, come on. My mic's not on, huh? Okay, Erin's going to go first? All right.
So thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Mayer. I just recently graduated from Brown, so I'm the non-Columbian. I studied philosophy, mostly ethics of emerging technologies and political theory, and I was very frustrated by the fact that my best friend in the computer science department 2 years ago graduated and worked for Snapchat. And it's like, we have so many big problems in the 21st century. We have healthcare and accessibility, and we have climate change and ocean acidification, and so many terrible problems and injustices, and yet the smartest people of our era are being kind of seduced by 6-figure starting salaries and swanky offices in Silicon Valley and Wall Street, and they're not spending their precious, precious technological resources and talent to address the biggest challenges that we face. And so I was very peeved at that, as you might be able to tell. And so we created Impact Labs, which seeks to inspire and empower young computer science students to use their skills for social good. That's what we do, and we can talk about it more. That's basically me. Ah. Emily? Now I sit down. Yes. Oh, yeah. So I don't know the format. You come and sit. Okay, I'll sit. Yeah, over here. Yeah, I'll sit over there. Thanks. Oh, I thought it was like one after the other, but apparently no. I'm being grilled. That's great. Great, love it.
Can you tell us all a little bit more about how this is working in practice, how long people are staying, how they're actually thinking about the trade-offs, sort of what the big hurdles are you're running into?
For sure. So we have a number of different initiatives. So the first that we started was called the Impact Fellowship. It was amazing. It was a 2-week program of technical education for computer science students. The first one happened last January, so a year ago. And it was amazing because we had speakers from NGOs and think tanks and research institutions and philanthropic organizations and social startups and people who were leveraging technology for social good. And they come in, and then students were able to like put faces and say, wow, these are the companies that are actually doing well by doing good. And it's amazing because tech students now hear of Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Twitter, Palantir, but they don't hear about the companies that are using these platforms for good ends. And so we have, the fellowship was and still is, I think, our core program. We also put on the Impact Summit, of which lovely Eric was one of our illustrious speakers, this past June, which had over 250 computer science students. We also have a mentorship network, which I urge you all to sign up for because you have valuable expertise in this room that could really, really, really greatly help students succeed. And we also we organize hackathons for social impact. We have a recruitment arm where we match tech students directly with these social startups. So yeah, and also advocacy, and we have a publication. So we do everything and everything. We try to throw everything to the wall and see what sticks. And it really does affect people in that. So we have so many testimonials, but we also see data of wow, we had one of our fellows last year who had accepted a job offer for Microsoft. That was a very prestigious job, PM at Microsoft, starting. And he chose to not do it, and instead he's now working at Zenesis, which is an amazing company that basically does public health work. They contract with healthcare governments, with governments using, it's basically Palantir, except instead of using it to drone people, they'll drone vaccines into rural villages. So it's boom, win. Yeah.
When we were putting this conference together last year, the original one at Brown, I had a chance to meet a lot of Brown students involved in computer science, which eventually led me to you. And there were two things I thought were interesting about those conversations. One was 50% of students at Brown are majoring or double majoring in computer science. And first that struck me as rather astounding. Then it occurred to me that probably in another 10 years it'll be 100% of students majoring in computer science, and it won't be a major anymore because it'll be like majoring in electricity, because you got to do computer science. It's part of the world. The other thing was that was the first I learned about this sort of social good movement in computer science. That a lot of the youngest 20-somethings have realized that in Silicon Valley their projects are split up in ways they don't really know what they're working on, and then it turns out that they designed a bomb or something. And that the young people in this country in the industry are taking it upon themselves to inject ethics into what they do, be conscious of that, and demand a response from their employers to pay attention to the ethics of what's going on in the computer science world. And that was the first I had heard of that. Now it's in the news within the last couple of weeks that the young Silicon Valley employees are starting to protest and demand a voice in what their companies are working on, which I think is kind of interesting. So you see any more of that?
It's great for me too, personally, because half my team is data scientists, data engineers, and it's because they have a social good sort of side to their personalities that I'm able to have.
Great. Well, let's bring out the next
thanks, everyone.
person. No, you stay.
Oh, wow, I really just...
Yeah,
okay.
just...
I'm out of batteries.
You're out of batteries?
Yeah. No, she's going to need this.
Hi everybody, I'm Natasha, and I represent a group of 5 students from SEPA who are working on a project called DASH, Data Analytics for Sustainable Herding. So DASH is a methodology to decipher complex interactions between climate change, human mobility, and violent conflicts using machine learning and artificial intelligence. The problem that we are looking at is the increasing farmer-herder conflict in West Africa, which has casualties more than the extremist group Boko Haram. The conflicts are driven by increasing competition for land and water resources, which are becoming scarcer because of climate variability, changing land use patterns, agriculture expansion, or even like water resources. So given the complexities of the problem, there is lack of analysis and there's lack of understanding of how different factors interrelate. So our solution, Dash, aims to unpack this complexity by using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And it does it in 3 ways: by mapping and visualizing the changes over time in climate migration patterns and land and water use. Secondly, by mapping conflicts and analyzing their drivers. And thirdly, by building a predictive model of potential conflicts and resource shortages. Dash was a winner of 2018 Geneva Challenge, a competition held by, under the patronage of late Kofi Annan, and has received Global Public Policy Fellowship at Columbia. We've had really great response from experts across the field, from United Nations, World Bank, World Economic Forum, and Ministry of Livestock in Senegal, among others. The potential applications for Dash are enormous. It could be applied to improve the pastoralist extension services in relation to access to land, food, market information, or even services like education or insurance. Yeah, I think that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Trade places. You sit here. Keep your mic.
Of course, when I was first reading about what you're doing, my head immediately went to all the other applications. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about plans or sort of where you're thinking about going from here.
Absolutely. So we are right now at the data collection phase, and we're looking to develop our model. So we're building our prototype in collaboration with certain partners. So within Columbia, we are partnering with Data Science Institute, Columbia Water Center. We have an external partner called ThinkIt, which is actually a venture launched by a Columbia alum. We're also looking to partner with certain institutions like UNDP, as well as Opal, which is Open Algorithms, which provides information on mobile call detail records. So right now we are trying to figure out a way forward, develop a proof of concept, and figure out how to make the business more sustainable, and how we could build these partnerships on the ground, as well as how we could scale it up to different countries and to a pilot country, which is Senegal.
I want to pick up on that. This is something I'm going to ask basically all the students. 10, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have asked this question at all, because if you're just out there doing good, you're out there doing good, and you never think about money. All of you have business models in one way or another. What's your business model? How is it that you're going to keep from going out of business and keep this thing going?
So again, so the methodology has a lot of applications, from geographic expansion to actually predict applications in different areas. So, so we, in fact, had a very conscious effort to build in a business model into this particular solution that we are developing. So we see potential so right now we are piloting in Senegal, or our pilot country is Senegal, but we see it getting expanded to almost 11 to 15 countries in Africa, just Africa. In terms of application, it has, you could apply the information, or apply, the knowledge which is generated out of this methodology in various sectors, and you would have people who would definitely take in and pay up for that. So right now we're looking at a model where we develop a customized sort of tool, and then customize it according to who the user is as well.
And the sorts of industries you see buying this data or this product?
Definitely, as in, first and foremost, the government and international agencies are primary audience for this kind of tool. But we see applications of this knowledge across industries. And like I mentioned, the agriculture extension services, pastoralist extension services, they would, as in to strengthen those services, this information could be crucial and, in fact, game-changing in certain matters.
There's a conflict avoidance issue in this, and the predictive analytics and so forth. Talk a little bit about that.
So,
I am using my microphone. I'm just not very good at using microphones. Yeah. No, the microphone's fine. I'm just not a good microphone user, so sorry about that.
So we are looking at conflict from the lens of natural resource shortage. So we're looking at increasing competition of land and water resources, and that's the lens through which we're looking at conflict from. So our whole premise is that we are looking at open sources of data, like satellite information, mobile information, and other demographic and market information. And we will be able to understand how natural resource or the patterns of natural resource use has taken place in the past in light of, say, climate change or in light of certain weather extreme events. And this particular information can also be helpful, like you can apply machine learning algorithms and other techniques to understand and predict in future where the next natural resource shortage could perhaps be, and which could potentially lead to a conflict. So that's that.
All right, let's bring on the next one. Who wants to go next? All right.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Theo Sharpe. I am one of the co-founders of Morayo. So Morayo is a technology platform that equips refugee business owners with the tools and resources to manage their business. So what is the problem here? Globally, refugee business owners struggle to mobilize resources and optimize their business operations. While this problem is not faced by just refugees, it's faced by other small businesses, it is often compounded with refugees. So we spent 3 weeks in Kampala and Nairobi meeting with refugee business owners to understand their needs and the barrier they face on a day-to-day basis. We learned 3 key things. Many entrepreneurs lack an established and trusted networks. Secondly, they struggle to obtain information on business registration process, the business regulations, and overall information needed to run their business. Lastly, they struggle to access the financial capital needed to run and scale their business enterprises. So this is where Morayo comes in. So Morayo is aimed at micro to small business enterprises. We provide our users the information needed and is tailored to their business needs. So with Morayo, all of our users is able to send us questions on the business regulations process or any information regarding registration or how to run their business through the Morayo app or via SMS, and we're able to provide them a tailored response. Refugee business owners can also tap into an established network of like-minded business owners to be able to transact and share best practices. We do believe that Morayo has the potential to help refugee business owners improve their businesses and sustain livelihoods for themselves and their families. Thank you.
So, Theo, you said to me when we talked yesterday that this is personal to you.
Yes.
Tell everybody why it's personal to you.
So for me, it's personal to me because I was once a refugee. I was being a refugee in Ghana and just seeing firsthand at some of the needs, because for most refugee camps, a lot of people think about food and aid and healthcare. But I also think that in order to empower refugees, we also need to be able to build that local capacity. How do you build that? You give people the tools they need to be able to be independent and create lives for themselves. So for me, I saw my family and I saw other families wanting to start a business, but they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the network, they didn't have information needed to start that. So we're looking to alleviate that problem But even being a refugee does not mean that you don't have the capacity to create something and to develop something for yourself.
Can you, I'm going to steal your question because it was the first thing that I thought
I was going to ask that anyway.
Do users pay in? What's the business model? How do you actually support your ability to provide all of these great services?
That's a great question. So the best business model is such that we are offering this to the refugee business owners, the ability to get information, the ability to establish network free of charge. Initially free because we believe that we want to be able to build that relationship. We want to be able to empower them. There's also an opportunity there as we build relationship, as refugee forms networks, there's an opportunity to be able to track data based on how they're transacting with each other, what services are they buying, how they are running their business, their sales model. That's where the opportunity comes in. We're able to then onboard onto the platform with suppliers who are looking to sell to these business enterprises. So we believe in people before data. Is using the relationship and empowering them before utilizing the data to make money. So that is our plan. We are going to also offer some of these businesses, as they scale and as they grow, we have specific tools regarding how to manage their inventory, how to track their sales, and at a premium. So they pay a very, very small fee to be able to utilize those tools. So that's how we plan to make money.
Okay, we'll bring the next student down.
Good afternoon. My name is Riley Jones. I am a Columbia alum. Graduated from here undergrad in 2017 and am currently in my second year at NYU Law School, where I do a lot of work as it relates to social entrepreneurship. About 3.5 years ago, I started a company called Bloc, which at the time was mainly focused on helping students of color kind of figure out that nexus of career and identity and connecting them to professionals that shared their experiences so that they could learn how to navigate that world. What that's turned into in the past 1.5 years is a software platform where we're actually trying to automate parts of that process, mainly working with organizations that do career services and career development, and that could be anything from Columbia students looking for a job to kind of traditional workforce development. Similarly, this is part work I'm passionate about. I grew up in Chicago on the South Side at a time when most people in my age demographic, black male between the age of 18 and 35, 40% of them were unemployed. And so the kind of experiences with violence and public education and all those things are things that I experienced. And while my path was, high school, Columbia, NYU Law, most of my peers and even some of my family members were detracted by these kind of larger societal factors, mass incarceration, violence, education, et cetera. And so the idea was trying to figure out what were the things that kept me from being able to kind of stray off of that path. And a lot of that was the organizations that I worked with, and the organization that kind of, you see that at every level. And so that's how we started, and we can talk more.
Can you say a little bit more? I got to read something, but not everyone here did. Can you say a little bit more about sort of the two sides of, at least my understanding from what I've read, we're talking about sort of the two sort of sets of customers, if you will, that you think about, and how you're providing value to both the individuals and then also the
right. So yeah, what I'd say is our end users, the people who are kind of using the product, are again, could be students or traditional workforce people who have been out of work for a while or have never kind of gotten to college and that kind of thing. Those would be our end users, the people who are receiving the benefits of the product. But the other people receiving the benefit of the product are the people who are actually responsible for helping these people. These are people who work at organizations like Work First in Brooklyn, or even people at Robin Hood Foundation who are doing like traditional, like, hey, this is how you do your resume, this is how you do your cover letter. And so what we have is a portal where that career services person can actually go in and edit the resume that their client is putting into the what we're calling the resume builder, and as well as the cover letter. And so our kind of long-term goal is to actually automate that such that it takes out time so that the career services person can help more people more effectively, and that the person applying for the job is getting much more of those kind of flags in terms of what to look for in their resume and cover letter on the front end.
So then, can I assume that the business model on some level is that those nonprofits that you work with will pay some service fee, because this then allows them to be more effective in what they're trying to do?
Yeah, exactly. Nonprofits, schools, and even governments, for sure.
The remaining two students, their groups have a similar sort of model to you. You and I talked about this a little bit, and this is kind of a variant of the question I asked Emma. That you're really not looking at a direct-to-consumer model. Mm-hmm. You're looking for your customers to be the people who are, in fact, servicing those consumers. And in this case, some NGOs that are working with governments. But essentially, you're trying to ply your trade through the government as really the market that you're serving. What led you to that instead of saying, you know what, I just want to cut them out, governments don't work, let's just create a whole workforce service system of our own?
I think experiencing these challenges myself, I have family who have been formerly incarcerated. I have family who went to schools that weren't like Columbia. I have a twin brother that went to school in Alabama in a historically black college. It's a completely different experience. And so I know that, those people can't afford to pay for my service, and that in many ways it would be a detriment, almost setting them back in order to push them forward. And for me, that paradox was a bit too much. And then I also think that there's incentive for those organizations. It is their, in many cases, their job to do that kind of stuff. So
as a lawyer who's given up practicing law, you and I talked about this a little bit. Young people come to me and say, "Gee, I'm thinking of going to law school," and I ask them why. But you feel that your law studies are actually helping you in what you're trying to do now. Why is that? For those out there that might think of going to law school, and I would tell them no, why is it useful?
I think even in the conversations that have gone on today and yesterday, the legal field is one of the few, I think, where you find people who are doing all sorts of things, right? Everything from real estate development to tech and just amazing things. So for me, it's been really useful because I have, for example, we were selected for WeWork's Creator Awards, or semifinalists, and so it happens that the COO of WeWork is an NYU Law alum. And so those kinds of relationships that I've been able to build have been really useful, and especially in a world where, being frank, right, being a person of color, trying to raise venture capital, getting in front of people who may not understand kind of intimately the problem that we're trying to solve, it does help to, one, have that credential, and two, to have relationships with those people.
All right, let's bring the next one down.
Hi everyone, my name is Natasha, and I'm representing a team of 3 from SIPA Columbia University. Before I start with the idea, just a few quick questions. How many of you think here that urban youth unemployment is a big challenge in today's world? Okay, almost everyone. Now the second question, how many of you think the skills you learned in school were useful for your jobs?
Does that include law school?
Okay, I mean K to 12. So, yeah, very few, right? So this is a problem which is supremely exacerbated in Philippines, in Metro Manila, which is a city of 12 million people with 19% underemployment and 28% unemployment rates. So one of the reasons which, when we did a lot more research about behind this high unemployment rates, we realized that there's a huge skill mismatch between what the Filipinos attain and what the labor market needs. To actually validate our hypothesis, we went to Manila over the winter break. We spent about 3 weeks there talking to multiple stakeholders, such as governments, businesses, employers, and finding out exactly what's happening. Contrary to what we might think, that technical skills are important, the biggest gap was with social-emotional or non-cognitive skills. They said skills like problem solving, communication, creativity, innovation are some of the biggest challenges which these students who come out of high school are facing. What our product, ILAW, does is it provides a platform to address this skill mismatch. It provides courses it provides guidance, career guidance, and a lot of different resources to these students so that they can develop their social-emotional skills and improve their prospects of getting a job. One of the major vulnerabilities here is that in Philippines, 90% of students end up dropping out of college after the first or the second year just because they're not able to afford it. So which is why we'll be targeting students who are currently in high school so that they have the opportunity to learn these skills and get a better job. And through this, we plan to reduce the unemployment and underemployment rates in Manila. Fun fact before I end, so ILAW in the local language of Philippines, Tagalog, means light. So we hope that the youth gets to light their own path. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll just ask my standard question. So where does the money come from?
So right now, our model is through grants. Like the first 1.5 years, we are looking to prototype the model. So as of now, like so far, we are focusing on needs assessment. The next step for us is to like partner with University of the Philippines and Teachers College to actually develop this curriculum and the prototype. And in the long term, so by long term, I mean like 1.5 to 2 years, we look at 3 revenue streams. One is employers would be given an opportunity to post their jobs. Second, we might consider like a premium account for more personalized services for some students. And third, we'll be using this as a platform to sell to schools. So once it's fully developed. So that's where the money would eventually come from, but right now it's on grants.
Have you thought at all about deeper partnerships with some of these employers?
Yes. So we actually, when we went to the Philippines, one of our primary research was to actually find employers who would be interested in this. So industries like BPO, hotel, tourism. And we had a lot of NGOs as well who were willing to partner with us. I think that was like a big start.
There was a book about the internet economy a couple of years ago called Free. It basically said that technology is going to compete everything down to a marginal price of 0, and everything's going to be free. How can you have a business world where everything's free and there is no money? How is that going to work? In the back of the book, there was a several-page appendix, like 120 ways in which businesses could be free and still make money. And what we're hearing here, there's a variety of different models of how they're going to make money. And the most common one, I think, in the current internet economy is the one that you opted for. And it's a fairly popular model you alluded to yesterday when we spoke. This is the model that LinkedIn uses among a number of other internet companies. It's called the freemium model. And it's basically, we make it free to everybody, and then there's an extra add-on service that we lure a small number of people into paying more for.
Yeah. So, what's the question exactly?
Well, there isn't really a question.
I was like,
it's kind of a commentary, but then I'm kind of like hoping you'll pick up on that and talk a little bit more about how you arrived at that.
So I think that's kind of what I just said. Okay. So yeah, for us, I think the problem is like a lot of times you don't reach out to the people who need the most amount of help. But you also think that it's not like someone who's in a private school has all the skills they need to get a good job, right? Like when you talk about things like communication and innovation, it's something which everybody is facing. So I think to have that model where people who can afford it, give that money to people who don't. So that was pretty much the idea behind it.
Once upon a time, I worked with an organization called City Year that's here in the United States, and one of the things that they focus on is that sort of social, emotional component. Are there other partner organizations or organizations that you've sort of learned from or are modeling yourselves after, or thoughts about going to other countries, et cetera?
So the US actually has a couple of organizations which have been like doing a lot of online courses. So we are thinking of actually reaching out to them to help us, give us some ideas. And Teachers College has recently started doing a lot of work like research in social emotional skills in developing countries. So there are a couple of professors who've been willing to partner with us on that. So that's the route, yeah.
All right, last group.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ryan, and I'm a student here at SIPA, at Columbia SIPA. So we are a group of students here that study public policy with an emphasis on finance, international finance, and energy. And we have created a model to solve the energy issue in sub-Saharan Africa. So today, as many of you know, sub-Saharan Africa has very low rates of electrification. It's remained an issue for decades. And despite rapid grid expansion throughout the region, there still remains a pretty significant issue with off-grid solutions and how they actually access the people who need it the most. So what we were doing is we did a bunch of research, and we thought instead of just developing another technological solution, such as a solar panel that is cheap, since most of the market is already saturated, we tried to create a B2B model, essentially, that would help finance companies that are already doing so and fill any gaps in the value chain. So we are a company called, we will be a company called Sango, that is a finance and analytical company that is looking to target companies that are already offering technological solutions to electrify more users in sub-Saharan Africa. So essentially what we do is we funnel investments from international investors, such as multilateral banks, other investors such as institutional funders, HNIs, foundations, family offices, etc., who have some mission to give sustainable energy to developing countries in the world. And we funnel those investments to companies in East Africa, primarily targeting Tanzania in the initial phase of our launch. And then those loans to the companies are then distributed as restricted capital, essentially, as loans to end users who then can use the money to buy their products, which are solar panels. In the meantime, we're also collecting information because our dream is to one day, hopefully soon in the next couple of years, create a map of the off-grid market throughout the region of sub-Saharan Africa, but starting specifically in Tanzania. So aggregating data would help us essentially understand payments, habits, and payments that are made through end users, how much they are. We can help the public utility in these countries expand access and make a payment that's adequate for the end users themselves, for the people who are actually using the grid. And then also aggregating other forms of data to make better products, help the government access these people and give them the things they need, and sort of identify which areas that need more energy first, et cetera. And so the big issue that we're trying to solve here is the bridge that's right now broken in the market between the end users who can't afford the energy products that are solar-specific products and the companies that are already doing it. So we're Sango, and I'm happy to talk more about it after this. I think I'll keep this.
As you've been building out your business model, have you run into any sort of initial regulatory hurdles or issues with sort of creating really new financing that is for different products than typically you've seen in sub-Saharan Africa? Can you talk about how you've dealt with that?
Yeah, so there are, finance is a very tricky thing, especially when you're leveraging international capital markets. So we initially wanted to create sort of an asset-backed security model, which is a securitization of end-user payments. But then we found out that Tanzania doesn't allow it. So then we had to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, so how do we do this? And so the benefits of this model is that we're keeping our fund outside of Tanzania, which is unfortunate because it doesn't allow us to create the local capital markets that we initially wanted to. But we still can get the right investors that we want on board and get their money outside of Tanzania and then funnel it in. What we're trying to figure out right now is how to guarantee the payments on the end. So on the side of the users, we plan to use the solar systems as collateral themselves, and so the companies have to collect them if they're not, if the end users are not making their payments. There's a lot of information that probably doesn't make sense to a lot of people here, but essentially the solar systems have a SIM card in them that can be shut off if an end user doesn't make a payment. And companies are already doing this model. They go and collect them. And so there is a way that we can make sure that the money is secure and guaranteed. And so we are building out more of a risk model to make sure that we can do that as well.
This is going to be in the nature of the question I asked Natasha. There's more a comment, and I'd like you all to react to.
Let's see if I understand.
Sure, and this is actually for several of you, and this is something I commented on yesterday in the conversation that I had with Tim Wu, that a lot of you are working on models that seem to me to be kind of the reverse of the way things are today that we spent most of this conference complaining about, which is that all of these industries are now architectured to suck data out of people, take advantage of them, and use the money and use the data to make money. Very often by selling you things you don't want, or roping you off in some other fashion. The majority of you have constructed business models where you're kind of doing the same thing and then turning the tables. You're collecting data these users. And then instead of feeding it to the companies in order to let companies extract as much from you as possible, you're feeding the data to the companies in ways that are designed to suck something out of those companies for the advantage of the people you're trying to serve. I mean, it's really a reverse of every way the world works today. I'd like you to comment on, A, how you arrived at that model, B, why you think you're going to make this work, and C, basically, I hope that's the future. Is it or not? Because pretty much we've spent the last 24 hours hearing it's not going to be.
Sure. So I think it will work because I have incredible teammates that are also in the audience, if they want to wave. And we're pretty capable. I would say that everything that is true in the, I hate to use the phrase or the terms developed versus developing world, but yeah, in the developed world is the opposite in the developing world. And so as you said, we're fighting for more data protection here. Whereas I think a lot of people are trying to get more data that isn't available in emerging markets because people are just off the grid and we don't know what their transactions habits are. They pay in cash. And if we can actually leverage some of that data, which they might not necessarily want at first either, but once they understand the value of it, they typically do want it, then maybe we can make better products for them. We did explore, so one of the things we want to do with the data is kind of create a credit profile of users so that right now people who want to purchase solar products, but have to go through this pay-as-you-go model with solar companies in Tanzania. There's no way for the company to tell if they're credit-worthy customers because they've never had a loan, or maybe there's not a central agency that has information with everybody in the market and what debt they have, like we do unfortunately have in the United States that has my name written everywhere. And the problem is that when we ourselves had to have an ethical discussion of whether or not we want to assign people credit scores like we have in the United States. I mean, my mother, myself, my brothers have like terrible credit scores and it weighs us down. And so why would I want to go to an emerging market and do this to people who have like way less than us? Well, so we have kind of developed an idea to reduce the risk of doing that, and that is creating sort of a village-wide or like a municipality-wide like credit rating. And although it sounds like red taping, which is a terrible thing that happens and happened in the US, we would use it in a way that would allow companies to identify risks initially when they're looking at villages that have really high rates of defaults or municipalities with really high rates of defaults, not to cut them off immediately, but to at least phase them out to a later phase. So initially, maybe they can't afford, as a company, because they don't have the capital, to invest in these riskier customers. But over time, because we are a mission-driven company, and we want to promote our companies to try to lend to these consumers, that over time we can give them the things that they need at maybe reduced rates or maybe with discounts, et cetera. So as much as we want to use data and we want to use it for the right things, there are a lot of risks, but we want to make sure that we do it responsibly, and we try to adapt the model for people who do need the services the most.
Theo and Natasha, you have similar business models too, so I'd like you to comment on the same issue.
Yeah, so I think with this whole issue of using like a reverse model with data, for most countries on the continent, I think there's this huge misconception that countries and municipality does not have a framework in place to capture this data to determine creditworthiness. The issue here is access, right? You could have financing, you could have some sort of credit model, which it does exist, but is that model taking away people's ability? Do they have access? Are they able to do that? What we've seen in the case for refugees in Uganda is that many of them within that community does not have sometimes the paperwork, but even if they do, the instance is like the model is such that they are even priced out of the financing or whatever that data process is. So they have credit score where they're going through this organized places, but sometimes you have an entrepreneur have to go to a bank where he's paying like 40, 50, as high as 60% just to get financing. With Morayo, what my team and I are trying to do is a lot of these groups, they are relying on the benefits of that communal network. So today they have these savings groups where they're holding each other accountable. They are recording their transactions. They're saying who is getting loans and who is defaulting and who's being fined. So what we're trying to do is, why don't we formalize those networks? Why don't we help them to better transact and record some of those data that they're already recording? So those data exist, but then again, in the future, if an individual wants to get loans, in addition to his own personal data, his own personal credit score, he has the support of that group. He's able to rely and get the groups back in. So there's that incentive that as an individual, I have the ability to act in good faith because what I do affects the group as a whole. So it's trying to emphasize on the importance of networks and that community living with the data. So using the data in the way that it's already being used today, it's trying to use existing, whether it's cultural, social structures that exist in those communities. Using credit scoring or some sort of financing model as it exists in the United States, it's not going to work on the African continent. So we need to go there and utilize what people are already using. It makes it easier, and that's exactly what they want. They're already doing it. So coming with a new model of saying, bringing in data and looking at online and trying to sell this data, it's not working. That's why with Morayo, we believe in people before data. We want to utilize that community network and the network that's already established.
Thanks. Natasha?
Absolutely. I think I can speak of data access and how data is actually very, like for example, right now, there is data being generated at a pace which has never been seen before. And it's just our ingenuity in how we sort of utilize these different forms of data which is being generated. So our model essentially looks at, combining these different data sets which exist in isolation and sort of making sense of all of it together. So be it openly available information through satellites, be it offline surveys which are existing in certain organizations' databases. It could also be privately held information like mobile phone call detailed records, which like private agencies like Sonatel or Orange hold. So our attempt is to utilize this information in a manner which would benefit the society and which would actually help decision makers and policy makers understand these interactions of different factors before they make, say, they make decisions around programs for, say, climate adaptation, resiliency, or even, resource management.
Everyone can answer, or one person can, or no one can answer if you don't find this to be a compelling question. But the two things that I sort of always think about when I meet a social entrepreneur are, one, what's the thing that's keeping you up at night, and what's the thing that you're most excited about where you're going. So.
Sure. Yeah. So normative ethics and political philosophy, that's what keeps me up at night, but that's not necessarily the good thing. But no, the truth is that there's so many, what keeps me up at night is the fact that I know that these issues are solvable, that they're tractable, that they have solutions. And I think it's the prerogative of the older generations to say like, oh, the world is going to shit. But then it's the challenge of the younger generations to prove them wrong, which I'm very happy that my panelists here are like so committed to righting those wrongs. And the fact that these are problems that have solutions. Like there's enough food in the world to feed 15 billion people. So it's just a distribution problem. Like, okay, that's a problem. Okay, yes, currently 2.2 billion people are malnourished or starving, but that means that like that doesn't have to be that way. Or like more solar energy hits the square mileage of Texas than all of the world's power plants combined. Like reliance on fossil fuels, not set in stone. We can fix these. It's gonna happen, and we're gonna try and make it happen. So that's what keeps me up at night, is the fact that I know that these really do have answers. And then in terms of the second question you asked, which was like how we can get there, or like what, that I would actually really be curious to hear all of your thoughts, because I think it really behooves us to say like what we need. I would really be curious to hear what you need. I know for like personally, we always need space. We have a lot of students. We have thousands of students in the network, and I know that's kind of like counterintuitive. Like we have thousands of students in the network. We have no shortage of man hours. Like we have a lot of volunteers from colleges across the country. But what we don't have is like a space to run our events. Like that's huge. And if someone raised their hand and came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I could give you like a space. Like I run a restaurant or whatever. Like I have a law firm and I have like, please come help me, because that's what we need." I would be curious to hear what you all need as well.
So what keeps me up at night? I think it's the frustration that education is always thought of as a school where you have to go learn math and English, which actually impacts a child so much, right? Like your age group from 0 all the way to 18, your adolescent years, everything, nobody really focuses on what you want, what's your passion, what you should be learning, how do you treat people, how do you become a good citizen. These are things which are so essential. And every time when I read about, oh, we have 100% enrollment rate, there's so many students who are going to school right now and they're doing this, not realizing that 90% of them drop out. So that frustrates me and also like motivates me to talk more about the skills which we actually need to talk about, to treat children as children and not as like objects or like factory workers, and move from the whole mentality of still catering to the Industrial Revolution. What excites me the most, I think it's just working with super passionate people. Have an amazing team. Fernando's in the audience, him and us in a class, unfortunately. But just the fact that you meet all these amazing people who are willing to actually solve the world's problems and just getting together, I think that's
So I think what keeps me up at night is perhaps how we treat environment, or how we keep environment as our last priority, and we don't understand the implications of certain actions, and we don't really like how climate change is sort of exacerbating. A lot of it's acting as a threat multiplier for a lot of issues which are underlying, and it's shocking how people just discard nature and discard environmental issues. I think what is exciting for us, so again, a shout out to my group. So there's Negora and Chiji who are in the audience. We are an amazing group of 5 people who are from different countries and who have completely different backgrounds. And we've sort of come together to look at this issue in a very multi-sectoral sort of a lens, and which is what any developmental issue or any problem requires. We need to understand the issue holistically and from different lenses. And that's what is exciting. And being at Columbia, we've got an extremely great platform to showcase the work, as well as we've gotten really great guidance. And we're hoping to actually make something tangible out of this whole endeavor.
For me, what keeps me up at night besides homework, I would say mostly is just the perception we have towards whether it's refugees, whether it's immigrants, whether it's small businesses. We often think of these groups are people who are not either technical enough or have the skills to be able to develop their own livelihoods. So a lot of times when a lot of companies are creating products, when they're creating services, we forget about that entire population because for some reason we don't see them as having the financial capital enough to be able to turn a profit. So what I'm very excited for is that like my team and I, Aisha and Shamira is out there in the back, and we're a team of also 5. We refuse to accept this narrative. We know that refugees or immigrants or small businesses, they're very gifted. They have the technical skills, they have the knowledge and the know-how to be able to use some of these services and some of these tools to be able to dig themselves either out of poverty or create sustainable livelihood. We need to provide access. We need, if you are a company, if you are a municipal, whatever you're creating, we need to create it with access in mind. And access is not how people are going to reach your service, but it's also about, do people have the capacity to be able to afford what you're creating? So there's so much prospect, and when I talk to small businesses in Kenya and across Africa, you see the hope, you see the dreams. It makes me very excited, being an African myself, to move back to the continent and know that we have the ability to move our continent forward. We have the ability to solve our problems, and we don't need to be seen as people who constantly wants to have handouts. So if you are a nonprofit, if you're a multilateral organization, I challenge you to go to the continent, meet with the local people, ask them what they want, and use their ideas and their philosophy to implement anything you want to implement. Anything otherwise, for me, it's not only unethical, but it's bound to fail. So that's what I'm excited about.
Can you hear me? Great. I'd say what keeps me up at night is the present. So I applied to law school in the fall of 2016. And so the kind of antics and stuff like that that are kind of going on in the world, not just in the US, but everywhere, that stuff really concerns me. But I think what keeps me excited, I love my grandparents. So my grandparents were super instrumental in raising me. They were born respectively, in my granddad in Tennessee and my grandma in Mississippi in the 40s. My granddad was a sharecropper who both of them ended up going to college and getting master's degrees and being educators. And their story, they're like, when the whole election and all that happened, they were kind of like, well, we've been through a lot worse. And to like have that like perspective that I don't, I think that keeps me excited that there is, like Erin said, work to be done, and there is not only work to be done, but the ability to solve those things. So that keeps me excited.
Yeah, so I think that I guess a lot of work in therapy has made me realize that I need to sleep at night, otherwise I go insane. So that's definitely been something I've been managing really well lately, despite it being my last semester and I'm looking for a job and stressing all the time. But when I do lose sleep, I think of a few things. I think, firstly, so I was the first in my family to go to college, and when I was out of college, or actually while I was in undergrad in California, I worked in Oakland at a nonprofit originally that worked with at-risk youth that were also first-generation college students. And it was, I think for me, like, everything that I do, even though energy and some of the things I've worked in, like financial inclusion, none of that really relates to ever helping people get into college anymore. But I'm like worried all the time that the same people are going to keep going into institutions like Columbia that are not like me, that are first generation, that are maybe not part of families that traditionally haven't gone to college in the past. And that to me has always been like a super important issue that I want to be more involved with that I'm not, unfortunately. And so all I can do is just, when I see people who are like me and understand them, is just hope that they succeed, even if they're my competitor. And yeah, I think that besides that, directly related to our company, Sango, I think the other thing that really keeps us worried, all of us, is just people not having the basics to do what they need to do. I lived in Ghana a few years ago in West Africa, on the other side of the continent, and I was visiting all the time a small village in the Volta region, and there was a woman there whose mother had passed away years before because she was trying to deliver another child and was in a hospital that didn't have electricity, and because of the infrastructure and many issues, she ended up passing away while she was delivering her baby. So I didn't mention in our pitch, but initially what we are targeting are institutions such as hospitals and schools, but because they won't be a big profit driver, we're also trying to target small and medium businesses and micro businesses. And so we want to create something that will help people, inevitably. And it has to refinance itself, it has to make profit, but we definitely want to help people, and that's what we want to do. And we don't want to be people from the outside helping people in East Africa, of course. We want to involve as many local people as possible, but that's what we're doing. What excites me, I would say, is the people that I go to school with. I'm in a program called Development Practice. I see many of my colleagues in the audience. They're from Ecuador, from Uzbekistan, they're from India, they're from all over. And I think that those people, every single day when I see them, they make me super excited because they are super intelligent people, super capable, and they remind me to stop stressing out, to stop being so uptight, and to also have some fun and learn something about their own perspective and their culture that I really appreciate. So thank you guys.
So I'm going to just say one thing, and then we're going to have one final question to kind of wrap up for the day. You'll notice in the program that there's a concluding half hour. You'll be glad to know that that's in there for a variety of reasons as a buffer, and we're going to buff it out. I don't think we need the buffer. What we need is to hear one last thing from these folks, and that'll be the end of the day. So I've got one question for everybody. We'll start down here, work our way down to the end. And the the question is, I want you to talk a little bit about yourselves and not your business per se. I know that all of you intend to pursue the ventures that you're working on right now, but you also have other plans for your lives, and I'd like you to say a little bit to the audience about where you go from here. After all, what we're here to talk about, and what we've been talking about for the last 24 hours or so, is the future. You guys are the future. I want to hear a little bit about your futures. What is it you're going to be doing from here for the next couple of years or the rest of your life, or whatever it is? We'll start with you. Go down to the end, and then Emma, you can give us the closing benediction and send everybody out there to promote the greater good. So, Ryan, starting with you.
I'll try to keep mine short since my last answer was long, but the short answer is I don't know. I'm really hoping that I'll have a job in May. That's about it. I'm looking at a few different places. I mean, do you just want me to tell you what I'm sort of hoping to do in terms of jobs?
Jobs, life.
Okay, yeah. Well, hopefully Sango will take off, and I'll be in East Africa this summer trying to make it work. Otherwise, yeah, I would love to work in the energy space after graduation, maybe for multilateral. I'm also looking into consulting, these kinds of jobs. So in life, yeah, I just hope that I can still have a life that will allow me to travel and be a person that works hard and gets, I guess, like, respect and earns, like, whatever he needs from that, but also finds, like, the balance. I think, like, for me, living the balance is really tough. So just having more time to enjoy life.
I think for me, I'm definitely going back to Chicago at some point. There are a lot of things going on there that, with people that I care about, that I want to devote time to. Actually, I also, my family is from Mississippi, so we have, like, land down there that we've had for, I think since, like, the 1890s, that we've never done anything with. And so for me, kind of having now this kind of social entrepreneurial lens, I am really excited to be able to. I just see like a whiteboard where I can, like, do a lot of stuff. So that's something that I think would be really fulfilling for me and my family as well. And so that's kind of like the next 10 to 15 years in terms of a project. But other than that, I really just care about, like, helping people who were in my situation 8-10 years ago, that were like, there was nothing in my life, I would say, up to this point that suggested that I would be sitting here in front of you. And that is, like, both gratifying and scary, because there are so many brilliant young people that I personally have known over the course of my life that should be sitting here. And that stuff matters a lot to me.
So for me, where I see myself in the next few years, actually in exactly 2 years, I have made up my mind that I'm actually moving back to the continent. And I've been in the States for the last 2 years, and I am sick and tired of mowing snow and walking in the cold. So I have made up my mind that whatever job that I get, whether it's Morayo or with any company, is going back. I think there is a lot of opportunity. As I travel around the continent, I see so much prospect, and I think that myself and the like of my colleagues, we're very primed to be able to solve those challenges and to be able to create that bridge between whether I'm in Ghana or in Liberia, and also with the United States. I think there's no denying that a piece of my heart, it will always be here, but I think my calling is to move back to the continent, and whether it's building infrastructure or is empowering people to create their own livelihoods and to be able to take things by the horn and just live an awesome life. So that is my goal.
This is a tough question. So I also graduate in May, like Ryan, and I think for Dash, we are looking to raise funds. We've applied to a few grants, and hopefully that works out. So I personally would like to continue working in the environment and technology sort of intersection between the two. So either Dash or any other sort of job which comes along. In terms of life, I would like to explore more. So I'm from India, and right now I don't plan to go back to India, but you never know. I want to explore outside, working with different sets of people and understanding different cultures. So yeah, that's about it for me.
Can I share a personal story with you all? It's very brief, but I have a lady friend in my life who's like a self-made millionaire, and she's from California, and she came and she stayed at the Plaza Hotel. She was visiting me in New York. And she welcomes me into this hotel, and I have this wonderful shower, and I'm in this fancy robe at the Plaza, and she had ordered ice cream, and she was playing Chopin, and there was like tea, and I was in like literally the lap of luxury at the height of worldly pleasures, right? And I was thinking to myself, wow, how could this get any better? Like I asked myself, literally like a Socratic dialogue, wow, how could this get any better? And I had this breakthrough. Oh, it would be so much more amazing if I knew that people weren't dying of malaria right now. That's literally what was going through my head. And you might think, wow, you're so weird that you thought that. But like, no, that was so reinforcing of my ideals of saying like, wow, Erin, you're not going to be contented just like trying to achieve material wealth or success or fame or power or fortune. Like, you really do care about this. And it's so core. If this is like what you're thinking, like that's what you really need to spend your life doing. And so I would like to cure malaria.
So just a quick background, I was actually working in the private sector, but I left that job to teach for 2 years, and I think that was life-changing for me. But one of the moments which always sticks to me is there was this one project which we did with my students. I taught 8th graders, 64 of them, and in which they had to use waste material to create monuments, like the big fancy Indian monuments. And the ones who did really well were the general students who were always termed losers, like not good in math, not good in English. And that was life-changing, right? Like, you think that you expect the top-performing students to always do well. And like, these are my babies who've done so well. I create Taj Mahal out of waste, right? So I think that moment is what drives me even now. When I see myself working in the future anywhere in life, I would always think about working in Indian education system because that's, I'm a product of that. But I also have seen what other things, the major issues. But in terms of short term, I hope ILAW works out, because I think that's a model which is very scalable to other developing countries as well, and we'd love to take it to India. But I'm open to opportunities right now. But yeah, more than very, very happy to go back to India, because that's where the heart belongs.
I've never given a benediction, so I think I'm not going to start. Not going to start now. I didn't know I was going to have the last word, but. I guess the way to end these things always is with sort of thanks and optimism for the future. Thank you, Eric, for putting together such an incredible 2 days. Esther, for giving me the opportunity to even be here, for introducing us. To all of you up here for, one, participating in this and letting us learn more about what you're doing, but for what you're doing. And for giving us this sort of really uplifting moment of the day to sort of leave on. I think we heard lots today that gives us pause. Certainly food for thought maybe is the understatement. But also there's lots of good that can come from the world that we live in today, from our ability to use data and technology. And I'm just really excited to see where we go from here. So thank you.
Well, this isn't the end of a conference. This is the start of a conversation. Let's keep it going. Thank all the students for being here. There is a good future to look forward to. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at another Greater Good gathering sometime in the future. We'll look forward to it. Thank you.